Item 4. Read Advocate Second Tyrrell Osk, holding the human's accreditation folio at arm's length, the way one holds something that might still be damp. Certified arbiter of fragrance and cosmetic compliance disputes, Terran Guild of Domestic and Hospitality Arbitration. He paused for the gallery, and the gallery gave him what he had paused for. Item 5. Banquet and Protocol Law with honors. Item 6. And I want the record to know I am reading this exactly as written: table linens, sumptuary claims, and ornamental horticulture trade standards. The laughter came down from the high benches of the Hall of Standing Names in 3 distinct flavors, and Senior Advocate Calcera Vin, 11th of her line to hold a speaking stone before this tribunal, catalogued all 3 without moving her face. There was the wet clicking of the Ulmain freight delegations, who laughed with their feeding arms. There was the rustle of the orchard families in their mourning silks, who laughed the way the wealthy laugh at a funeral, into closed fists, eyes bright. And there was the low harmonic hum of the assessor's clerks along the rail, who were not supposed to laugh at all and were doing it anyway in their throats, where they thought the recorders could not reach. Calcera permitted herself one slow blink of her second eyelids. Satisfaction in a hyacere of her caste looked like rest. Across the floor, at the small table the seating clerks had assigned her, the human read along on her own copy of the folio as though checking Tyrrell's pronunciation. She was young even by the compressed arithmetic of human lives, 26. The intake form said, with brown hair pinned up off her collar and a carpet bag at her feet that had been searched twice at the door because no one believed an advocate would carry one. Juniper Hale accredited counsel for the human colony of Green Hollow in the matter of its own extinction. She did not flush. Whatever color humans turned, she did not object. When Tyrrell reached item 9, perishable goods carriage, refrigerated and ambient, she nodded slightly the way a tradesman nods at a correct invoice. Advocate Osk. First Assessor Odrene Kais drifted a hand's width higher above the presiding dais, the gas chambers along the Bulvane's flanks dimpling with the movement. Kaisi's voice came from somewhere in the middle of that translucent bulk, unhurried, faintly amused at everything in the universe equally. Is there emotion attached to this recitation, or are we being read to for pleasure? Emotion, First Assessor. Tyrrell set the folio down with ceremony. House Vendrassi moves that the Tribunal Note Counsel for the respondent holds no accreditation in charter law, agricultural liability, interworld carriage of pathogens, or any field within a system's reach of this petition. We do not move to disqualify. He let the pause open again. We would not deprive the colony of its chosen champion. More laughter, the third flavor louder now. Calcera watched the human write something on a paper pad, actual paper, actual graphite, and fold her hands over it. Noted, Kais said. The record will reflect that counsel for the respondent is exhaustively certified in matters this tribunal has never once been asked to hear. Madam Hale, do you wish to answer the motion? No, thank you, the human said. Her voice was even and unremarkable, a service counter voice. It's all true. You concede your accreditation is irrelevant. I concede it's as written, Hale said. Relevance we'll find out together. Kaisti's gas chambers shivered, a Bulvane's version of a raised eyebrow or possibly indigestion. 400 years of jurisprudence had never settled which. Proceed to the petition. This was the moment Calcera had rehearsed with the pleasure of a woman arranging flowers, and she rose into it. Her robes were the gray of her chambers, the speaking stone warm in her palm, and the Hall of Standing Names arranged itself around her the way it had arranged itself around her mother and her mother's mother. The 9 assessors in their gradient above, the witness ring empty and waiting at the floor's center, the standing names themselves, every charter the tribunal had ever granted or revoked, burning in cold script up the walls, 6 centuries of worlds given and worlds taken away. Somewhere on the east wall, low, recent, modest, Green Hollow, Moon of Caro, agricultural charter, human. By the end of the season, she intended to watch it struck through. First Assessor, Assessors of the Gradient. Her voice carried without effort. The hall was built to carry voices like hers. 11 seasons ago, the garden world of Ophael granted the human colony on Caro's moon a courtesy it had extended to no other species. A standing contract to supply seed grain to the glass orchards, the oldest continuously bearing orchards in the Verge, the dowry of House Vendrassi since before this tribunal sat. 3 seasons ago that courtesy was repaid. An ashleaf blight, never once recorded on Ophael in 900 years of cultivation, appeared within 40 days of a human grain shipment clearing the Vendrassi orbital docks. It has killed the glass orchards to the rootstock. It has ended a living lineage of trees older than human writing. She turned, unhurried, and let the hall look at the petitioner's gallery. The orchard families in mourning silk, and at their center the matriarch Austrian Vendrassi, ancient and upright, her pale hands folded on the head of a cane cut. The feeds had reported this lovingly. From the first tree to die. House Vendrassi does not come here for grief, Calcera said. Grief is not actionable. It comes with manifests, with soil assays, with sworn carriage records and the testimony of those who watched the orchards die, and it asks this tribunal for the only remedy proportionate to the loss. Revocation of the Green Hollow Charter, forfeiture of its surety, and assignment of the Caro Aquifer rights in indemnity. The petition is documented in 11 volumes. The respondent's answer, and here she did not look at the human, which was its own way of looking, is 1 volume. We are told it was drafted in 9 days. 8. Hale said from her small table without looking up. It got a laugh she had not been reaching for, or had she? Calcera filed the question and moved past it. The evidence will be heavy, First Assessor, because the truth is heavy. We will not lean on sentiment. We will put the chain itself before you, link by link. The grain, the hold it traveled in, the seals it traveled under, the dock it crossed, and the trees it killed. And at the end of it, we will ask the tribunal to do what this hall was built to do when a charter holder poisons the hand that chartered it. She inclined her head to the gradient and sat. It had been, she knew with the calm of a professional, very good. Tyrrell's eyes were shining. Along the petitioner's rail, the matriarch tipped her cane a degree in acknowledgement, the way one tips a glass. Madam Hale, Kais said, "You're opening." The human stood. She did not move to the floor's center, where the acoustics flattered. She stayed by her table in the refreshments alcove, and that deserved a word, because the seating itself had been the morning's first comedy. The concourse's registry had parsed her accreditation codes overnight, and whatever clerk logic lived in that system had filed Terran Guild of Domestic and Hospitality Arbitration under catering and allied vendors and assigned her the alcove table by the service door, between the urns of bitter leaf tea and the racks of assessor's refreshments. The error had been discovered at dawn. It had been offered correction. The human had looked at the alcove, looked at the floor, said, "It has the best view of the witness ring," and kept it. The feeds had run the image for 2 hours. Earth's advocate seated with the tea urns. The caption that stuck, by mid-morning, was the Garnish advocate. First Assessor, Hale said. Assessors. Green Hollow is 4,106 people. They grow seed grain, they fix their own machines, and they have never been before this tribunal or any other. They are accused of carrying a tree disease across 40 light years in sealed holds and killing orchards they were paid to feed. If that's true, you should strike their name off your wall. I'd help you reach. A pause. Nobody was sure yet whether to laugh. She didn't wait to find out. Counsel says she'll put the chain before you link by link. Good. That's all I want. I've spent 8 years in small wares arbitration. Linens, banquets, perfume, cut flowers, cargo that rots if you look at it wrong. It's trivial work. Nobody writes songs about it. But it teaches you one thing the great chambers don't teach, which is what things actually do, how wax sets, how nectar turns, how lacquer cures, how a vine is shipped and tagged and sold. So when the chain comes out, I'll be looking at the links. That's all. If every link holds, Green Hollow falls, and it should. I don't think every link holds. She sat down. 11 words of notes, Calcera estimated, and she had used perhaps none of them. Brief, Kais observed, by the standards of this hall. The tribunal thanks you for the novelty. First witness after the meridian recess, the hall rose, rustled, broke into its component delegations. Tyrrell was at Calcera's shoulder before the assessors had cleared the gradient, his smooth young face bright with the particular joy of a junior who believes the trial has already been won at the reading of a folio. Table linens, he said. 11 volumes against table linens, senior. The matriarch asks if we might rest the petition by Hallows Day and spare her the hotel. The matriarch will have her orchards priced by season's end, Calcera said, gathering her stones. But you will stop performing for the gallery. You got your laugh. The laugh is a coin you spend once. It bought a good morning. It bought a caption. She looked, despite herself, across the floor. The human had unpacked the carpet bag onto her small table. The paper pad, a folding hand lens in a brass ring, a fan of Fex watches, and a squat little book bound in oilcloth whose spine read, when the light caught it, Carriage and Care of Perishable Goods, 9THED. She was eating a sandwich she had brought from somewhere, with the tea urns at her elbow, entirely at home, as though the Hall of Standing Names were a station canteen that happened to have 9 judges in it. A server drone paused at the alcove, read her table assignment, and offered her a tray of the assessor's refreshments by mistake. The human looked at the tray, took 1 biscuit, and said something to the drone that made its courtesy light blink twice. Senior? Tyrrell said. Nothing, Calcera said. Prepare Corrid. The chain begins with the seals, and the seals are unimpeachable. She believed it that morning. The record would want her to say she had believed it, and she had fully, restfully, the way one believes in load-bearing walls. 11 volumes. 9 assessors, 6 centuries of script burning on the walls, and across the floor a child of a species that had been splitting atoms for barely 4. of those centuries, eating a biscuit at the catering table, reading her little oilcloth book about how to ship fruit. It would become necessary, in the weeks that followed, for Calcera Vin to reconstruct exactly when the floor had begun to tilt. She would put it later than it was. Everyone in the hall would put it later than it was, except the recorders, who put it here meridian session, first day. Petitioners call Corrid Ulth. Bonded Freightmaster Vendrasi Orbital Docks. Corrid Ulth came to the witness ring the way a cargo crane comes to a dock. Slowly, with a sense of great weight, competently managed. The Ulmain Freightmaster stood twice the human's height, four-jointed arms folded into the formal lattice of his guild. Gray plating waxed for the occasion, and his oath rumbled the floor plates. 31 years on the Vendrasi docks, 9,000 recorded transfers. Not one breach citation. Calcera led him through it like a processional. Freightmaster, describe the human shipment. Designation TG-114. Seed grain, 1,100 bushel equivalents, 4 sealed carriage pods. His voice was a quarry speaking. Received at Green Hollow Lift Point, carried under bond aboard the Lent Favor, transferred at Vendrasi Orbital, lightered down to the Orchard receiving sheds. I supervised the orbital transfer personally. Why personally? Heritage cargo protocols. Anything bound for the glass orchards moves under a Freightmaster's own eye. House rule older than me. And the seals intact at every waypoint. His feeding arms made the small triple tap of Ulmain certainty. I verified them myself at transfer. Bond wax over the latch points, house stamp in the wax unbroken. It is in my log with my print beside each entry. Calcera walked him through the log, the prints, the timestamps, the chain of custody from lift to shed, and the hall settled into the rhythm of a case being built well. This was the foundation link. The grain had traveled sealed, untouched, untouchable. Whatever rode in those pods had ridden in them from Green Hollow. She finished, thanked him, and turned to the alcove with the smallest permissible courtesy. Your witness, Madam Hale. The tribunal's standing orders allotted cross-examination time by accreditation weight, and the clerks, those same clerks who had filed her with the caterers, had granted the human what the schedule called abbreviated courtesy. A fifth share of floor time, renewable at the gradient's pleasure if she proved to be using it for law. Hale carried her paper pad and her brass hand lens to the ring, and had to tilt her head far back to address the Freightmaster, and the gallery enjoyed that, the scale of it, the bug-small advocate at the foot of the crane. Freightmaster, congratulations on 9,000 transfers. She said it without irony, and Corrid's plates shifted, mollified before he had decided to be. Your log says you verified bond wax seals on all 4 pods at orbital transfer. Whose wax? House wax. Vendrasi indigo stamped. I mean the compound, not the color. What was the wax? A pause, one joint of one arm flexing. Bond wax is bond wax. Guild standard. Guild standard is a registered carriage compound, Hale said. Set point around boiling water, takes a stamp at pour, won't soften below cargo fire temperatures. It's ugly stuff. It dries gray unless you pigment it, and pigment costs, so most houses don't. You said indigo. The house seals are indigo, Corrid said. Always have been. Heritage Cargo carries the heritage color. Lovely. Petitioner's Exhibit Volume 2, page 410, that's the close imaging of the pod latches at the receiving shed. May I? The image bloomed above the ring at her gesture. 4 latch points, 4 crisp indigo seals, the Vendrasi tree and gate stamped deep and clean. Freightmaster, I've handled a fair amount of indigo wax. There's a banqueting compound called festal wax. It pours cool, takes a beautiful stamp, holds a color like that without pigment surcharge. Caterers use it on gift casks and invitation scrolls because it's pretty and it's cheap. It also softens at hand heat and crazes, fine cracks like old glaze, if it spends more than a day or two anywhere below freezing. Carriage holds run below freezing. She raised the brass lens, though the image was already magnified far past its power. The gesture was for the room. Would you look at the stamp edges on Pod 3 and tell the tribunal whether you see crazing? Corrid looked. The hall looked. At that magnification, the answer sat in plain sight and had been sitting in 11 volumes of exhibits for anyone whose eyes had ever needed to care about wax. The seal faces smooth, glossy, unctuous, the stamp edges sharp as the day of pour, not one crack. I see clean seals, Corrid said, but the quarry had gravel in it now. So do I. Perfect seals, festal bright, hand-poured, uncrazed. On latches that your own manifest says spent 19 days at hold temperatures that craze festal wax and turn guild bond wax frost gray. Hale lowered the lens. Freightmaster, I'm not asking you whether the seals were intact. I believe you completely. I'm asking you when they were poured, because the wax in this image never rode in that hold. It was stamped warm dockside after the voyage within a day or two of this picture being taken. Whoever sealed those pods sealed them at Ophale. The hall did not erupt. The Hall of Standing Names never erupted. It was built of older manners than that. What it did was worse. From where Calcera sat, it leaned. 9 assessors, 40 delegations, the whole gradient inclining a degree toward the witness ring like a field bending under one wind, and in the petitioner's gallery the matriarch's cane, which had been tipped at its small angle of satisfaction all morning, came slowly upright. "Objection," Calcera said, rising voice level because she had trained it to be level before she could read. "Counsel is testifying. There is no foundation for these wax opinions." The human turned to the gradient, mild as milk. "First assessor, my accreditation is in the record. Item 5, banquet and protocol law. Festal wax is in my jurisdiction. It would be strange if it weren't in my testimony." There was a beat of silence exactly the size of the morning's laughter. "Overruled," Kai said, and the Bulvane's gas chambers were perfectly still, which every advocate in the verge knew to be the stillness of a judge becoming interested. "The tribunal finds counsel qualified on the question of wax. Continue, Madam Hale. You have a check somewhere in that drifting bulk of the standing orders, 4 minutes of courtesy remaining." "I'll only need one," Hale said. She used 40 seconds of it. "Freightmaster Corrid. Your log, your prints, your 31 years, I'm not touching any of it. You verified that seals were present and unbroken, and they were, and you wrote it down honestly. One last question. At the orbital transfer, did you verify the seals against the poor records, the wax batch logs from Green Hollow Lift Point, or against the house stamp register at Ophale?" The Freightmaster's arms unfolded from their lattice very slowly, the way a bridge is dismantled. "The stamp register," he said, "at Ophale. The poor records were not." He stopped. The hall waited. "I was told the poor records had been forwarded to the House Archive by the estate office. I verified the stamp against the register the estate office provided." "Thank you," Hale said. "You've been exactly as careful as your guild requires. The carelessness belongs to somebody else." She gathered her pad and her lens. "Nothing further, First Assessor, and I'm returning 2 minutes of courtesy for the clerks to put wherever they keep it." It should have been insolence. Spoken with any heat at all, it would have been insolence, and Calcera could have fed it to the gradient as insolence and watched the human's fifth share shrink to nothing. But there was no heat in it anywhere. The young woman sounded like a vendor making correct change, and the hall received it as exactly that, and somewhere along the assessor's rail a clerk made the throat hum of suppressed laughter. And this time the laughter was not pointed at the alcove table. Calcera sat through the adjournment formalities with her hands folded and her mind running like a pump. The seals were cosmetic. The seals had always been the foundation link. Her own phrase, link by link, was going to be quoted back at her by every feed in the verge by nightfall, and the human had not attacked the link. She had picked it up, turned it over, and shown the hall the maker's mark on the underside. Festal wax, a caterer's compound. The thing was either a clerical absurdity with an innocent explanation buried in the estate office's files, or it was she declined, that first evening, to finish the sentence even privately. 11 volumes, one wax anomaly. Cases of this weight shrugged off worse. "It's nothing," Tyrrell said. In the chambers the concourse rented to visiting counsel, where the long window looked down the station's ring toward the dark blot of the human transport docked among the Orchard family's white yachts. He had the imaging up and was scrolling the latch close-ups with the determined energy of a man tidying a room where something has died. Resealing happens. A dock clerk finds a seal abraded, panics about heritage protocol, pours a fresh one to make it pretty for receiving. Sloppy, fixable. We recall Corrid, establish routine resealing with festal wax from the estate's banquet stores, with whatever was in arm's reach. Sloppiness is not conspiracy, Senior. It's barely even interesting. Then you will get me the poor records from Green Hollow Lift Point, Calcera said, which our own Freightmaster believed were in the House Archive, and we will put the original seals before the gradient and bore the hall to sleep with our transparency. Tyrrell made the request that night. The estate office's answer arrived 2 days later, courteous and complete-looking, a sheaf of records in good order, and Calcera, who had been a senior advocate for 30 years precisely because she read what juniors skimmed, noticed that the poor log for shipment TG-114 was an extract, not an original, and that the extract had been attested by the estate steward's office rather than the Lift Point bond agent, and she put the sheaf in a drawer and did not enter it into evidence, and told herself she was merely holding it in reserve. It was the first thing she did in the entire proceeding that she did not tell Tyrrell. The feeds, meanwhile, had their carnival. Garnish Advocate melts the wax, ran the kinder captions. The crueler ones ran at her own column inches. 11 volumes of chain, and the first link was poured at a party-supplied bench. The Orchard family's communications office answered with grief. Fresh imagery of the glass orchards in their death, white limbs against the famous prism panes, the matriarch walking the rows with her cane, and grief held the public ledger, mostly because grief was real and wax was funny, and funny does not outvote dead trees. But Calcera had argued before the Hall of Standing Names since before Tyrrell was decanted, and she knew the sound a gallery makes when it has decided to start watching the other table. The hall made that sound now every time the humans stood up. Not approval, appetite. On the fourth day, the petition called it science. Doctor of Soil's Felon Drave had been retained from the Murex consultancy at Briss for a fee that had its own line in Volume 9, and he gave value for it. Coral-plated, polychrome, magnificent in the witness ring. With the Murex habit of building little architectural gestures while he spoke, as though testimony were a thing one constructed in the air. His credentials took the better part of an hour and were unanswerably real. Blight pathology, carriage epidemiology, 300 published surveys. The organism, he said, and built a spire with his fingers, is a saccharolytic mold of the velvet bloom family. It colonizes phloem sugars, girdles the limb, and kills the tree within a season. The strain recovered from the glass orchards carries metabolic markers consistent with cultivation in an enriched managed medium, not a wild lineage, something raised in proximity to concentrated agricultural sugars. Such as a seed grain operation, Calcera said. A grain operation is the textbook reservoir for this family of organism, and the strain's tolerance profile, cold hardy, dormancy capable, is consistent with carriage in an unheated hold across deep space. In your professional judgment, where did this strain come from? From an artificial sugar-rich cultivation environment transported cold, introduced to the orchards within the past 4 seasons, Drave's polychrome plates flushed with conviction. The human colony's operation matches that profile in every particular. It was good. It was very good. Calcera watched the gradient take notes and felt the floor level itself somewhat. Science had weight that wax did not. She tendered the witness with the day's first real confidence. The human came to the ring carrying, this time, nothing but her paper pad, and Calcera noted, with an advocate's reflexive bookkeeping of detail, that a different object had migrated from the carpet bag to the alcove table and sat there in plain view. A small cut-glass bottle with a stopper, the kind sold in arcades. Perfume. Dr. Drave, Hale began. You said velvet bloom family. The strain itself, your report types it as a cultivated saccharolytic mold, enriched medium, cold hardy. I want to make sure I understand the markers. You found elevated tolerance to ethanol in the substrate. Yes? A minor marker, consistent with various enriched media. You found pigment suppression. The bloom grows white, not violet. Also consistent with managed cultivation. Wild strains pigment for light defense. Cultivated strains lose it. And you found, this is page 280 of volume 8, a residual ester signature in the culture wall. You footnoted it as commercial contamination, non-diagnostic trace esters. Drave built a small dismissive arch. Cultivation environments are full of stray volatiles. One does not type a strain by its perfume. Funny you should put it that way, Hale said, with no inflection whatsoever, and the hall leaned again. Doctor, indulge item 4 of my accreditation for a moment. Fragrance and cosmetic compliance. There's a fermentation culture used across the Verge scent trade. It's called Velvet Mother in the catalogs. It's a domesticated velvet bloom. It's raised in sugar-rich vats. It's bred white because pigment muddies the distillate. It's ethanol tolerant because it lives its whole life next to the maceration tanks. And it throws exactly one signature ester, which is the base note of a commercial fragrance family. I've arbitrated 3 adulteration claims about it. I could pick that ester out of a crowded room. She turned a page of her pad unhurried. The ester in your footnote.
It's that one, isn't it?
Catalog designation, Velvet Mother. Trade name of the finished scent, and she said the name, and she did not have to explain it to the gallery, because half the gallery was wearing it. Ophel Gold. The export pride of the Vendrassi Estate's perfumery moons. The scent the orchard family's own communications office sprayed through its grief. Imagery, the one the feeds called the smell of old money. Dr. Drave stood very still inside his plates. I would have to review the catalog standard, he said. The tribunal's clerks can fetch it in about a minute, Hale said. While they do, if the ester matches, doctor, then the enriched, managed, sugar-rich, cold-tolerant cultivation environment your strain came from isn't a human grain. Barn 40 light-years away, it's a perfume works. And the only perfume works in this system that rears Velvet Mother at scale is on the petitioner's own estate, 11 kilometers from the glass orchards on the same water. She looked up from the pad, polite as a clerk at a counter. You footnoted the answer, doctor. I'm only asking you to read your own page out loud. The catalog standard took the clerks 90 seconds. The match took the hall considerably less time to absorb. Drave, to his professional credit, did not fight the ester. He retreated up the slope of qualification, possible cross-contamination of the sample, shared regional water signatures, the need for further assay, and the gradient let him go with the courtesy owed to a man whose 300 surveys had just acquired a footnote of their own. Redirect advocate, Vin? Kais asked. Calcera rose, and for the first time in 30 years before this tribunal, she heard her own pause. 2 seconds. The recorders kept those too. Dr. Drave, she said. Does the presence of a commercial ester establish where the strain was reared? No. It establishes a consistency, not an origin. Could a strain from the human operation have acquired the ester signature through environmental exposure after introduction to Ophale? It is not excluded, Drave said, and every advocate in the hall heard the testimony die of qualification, there in the ring, attended by its fee. That evening, the matriarch's secretary conveyed that the matriarch wished the senior advocate to dine at the family's rented residence on the concourse's garden tier, and Calcera went because one went. The residence smelled of Ophale gold and cut flowers, and the particular dry sweetness of morning silk. Over a meal she did not afterward remember eating, Austrain Vendrasi spoke of the orchards as one speaks of dead children, of 900 years of stewardship, of the patience of trees, and her grief was. Calcera would have staked her chambers on it, did in fact stake rather more than that, entirely real. The trees were dead. Whatever else was true in the universe, the trees were dead, and this ancient woman had loved them. It was only at the door, departing, that Calcera asked about the estate office's poor record extract and the steward's attestation, and whether the original Lift Point logs might be produced to chambers as a precaution. The matriarch's hands settled on the cane's head, one over the other. You were retained advocate because your line has stood before that hall for 11 generations, she said pleasantly. I am told the human girl arbitrates disputes about scented candles. If the day comes that you cannot manage a candle merchant with 11 volumes in your hand, tell me promptly. Houses retain. Houses also reconsider. In the lift down from the garden tier, Calcera Vin examined her own reflection in the dark glass, the gray robes, the pearl-smooth hyessery face her mother had worn before her, composed, professional, retained, and found she was thinking, with a thoroughness that alarmed her, about wax, about a steward's office that attested its own extracts, about a perfume that lived 11 kilometers from the trees it was now accused by, and about the human at the catering table who had known what the footnote was the moment she read it, and had ordered the cut-glass bottle from an arcade, and had put it on the table in plain view that morning and never once touched it, set dressing. Deadpan, a quiet little flag planted hours in advance saying, I already know how this witness ends, and had then walked to the ring and ended him, with his own page numbers gently the way you'd take a sharp thing away from a child. Item 4. Tyrrell had read to the gallery on the first morning, and the gallery had laughed in 3 flavors. Calcera was beginning to assemble a list of her own, things the human had been mocked for in order. Wax, item 5. Perfume, item 4. There were 9 items in that folio. The petition's third witness was meant to be the safe one. Solobrem ran the guest pavilion at the Vendrasi orbital docks. Vintner host by guild rating, a Tessic of the hospitality castes, slight and quick and professionally warm, the sort of being who remembers 1,100 regular travelers by their preferred glass. He was not science, and he was not freight. He was an eyewitness, and eyewitnesses with likable faces survive cross-examination the way cork survives water. His account was simple, and he gave it well. On the night of the Hung Lanterns Festival, 3 seasons ago, the same week shipment, TGE 114, lighted down. He had stayed late in the pavilion's upper lounge after the guest service closed, taking his own glass by the long window, as was his habit on festival nights, and he had seen, on the cargo apron below, humans from the lighter crew moving containers in the dark, off schedule, away from the bonded lane. 2 of them with a low cart, crossing from the human lighter's shadow to the orchard receiving sheds and back. He had thought it odd. He had mentioned it to the dock office in the morning, and the dock office had logged his remark, and there the remark had slept in volume 6 until the petition woke it and dressed it in significance. Unsupervised human access to the receiving sheds, the very night before the grain went down to the orchards. Why were you certain they were human? Calcera asked. The gate. Brem's gill frills ruffled apologetically toward the alcove table, a host to the last. Forgive me, but nothing else on that dock walks the way humans walk. Top-heavy, pendulum arms. Even at distance in lantern light one knows. And the hour? Past middle night. The procession barges were still going by under the window. I remember the lamplight on the apron. I had poured the last of the sallow nectar, fresh from the festival pressing, and the pressing is middle night exactly. So, past middle night, before the cask ran out. A modest ripple of warmth through the gallery. Even the assessor's clerk smiled. He was a good witness, detail without strain, humility without fog. Your witness, Calcera said, and this time she watched the human the whole way to the ring, looking for the flag, the planted bottle, the early tell. There was nothing on the alcove table but the pad and the oilcloth book. She had begun, Calcera realized with a flat private incredulity, to scout the catering table for ordnance. Vintner host, Hale began. I've stayed in pavilions you'd be ashamed of. So let me say first that your lounge has a reputation even on Earth transports. The long window, the festival service. Brem's frills ruffled, disarmed. On Hung Lanterns Night, the Lounge Keys Festival protocol? Full protocol, of course. The house takes the festival seriously. So do I. It's a beautiful rite. I certified banquet protocol for 3 seasons on the Verge circuit. Hung Lanterns is in the manual. Walk me through the lounges part of it. From dusk. The lamps are taken down to half, the service moves to floor braziers. The pressing is announced at middle night, the nectar is served, and the window? A small pause, the first of his testimony. The window, the long window, the one you sat beside. Festival protocol, Vintner host, the procession barges pass beneath it, and the rite requires that the lanterns process unwatched from above. Nobody looks down on the lamps look up at heaven. That's the whole liturgy. Every guild manual I've certified puts it the same way. From first barge to last, mirror side out. She let the hall have a moment to understand, and then said it in plain freight. The shutters, Vintner host. On Hung Lanterns Night, from dusk until the last barge, which that year by the festival registry was 2 hours past middle night. The upper lounge's window is shuttered, sealed and mirrored on the outside. Protocol of your own house. You could no more see the cargo apron through it than through the floor. Salo Brem's frills went flat against his neck. There is a service gap, he said, between barges. The shutters may be cracked for ventilation. Cracked for ventilation during the procession is a protocol breach your own house finds staff for. Did you breach festival protocol, Vintner host? It's an honest out. Take it if it's true. The fine's long expired. Hale's voice stayed level, even kind, and that was the trap of her, Calcera saw. She built the witness a dignified exit at every turn, and each exit had a toll, and the toll was always the testimony, because if the shutters were sealed per protocol, you saw nothing. And if you crack them, I have a follow-up about angles, because the ventilation crack opens upward toward heaven and the barges, and the apron is 60 degrees down. The Vintner host looked at the petitioner's table, quickly, once, the look a server gives the kitchen when an order's gone wrong, and Calcera felt the look land on her own table like a spill. And while you decide, Hale went on, mild, turning a page, the nectar. Fresh sallow nectar from the middle night pressing. Lovely stuff. I arbitrated a carriage claim about it once. A hauler chilled a consignment wrong and turned 80 casks to vinegar. And I had to learn more about sallow nectar than anyone should know. It oxidizes, Vintner host. Open to air, it goes amber and then brown and undrinkably bitter inside the hour. It's why the pressing is a midnight. Right, and not a morning one. You testified you were finishing the last of the fresh nectar while you watched humans on the apron past middle night before the cask ran out. But your own statement to the dock office, volume 6, page 90, says the brass lens came up, purely ceremonial. When I went down at dawn, I finished the cask before reporting. Fresh nectar doesn't keep till dawn, Vintner host. Either the cask was vinegar and you said it was fresh, or the cask was fresh because somebody opened it at dawn, in which case your middle night was actually daybreak. The lanterns were out. The shutters were open, and the bonded day shift was on the apron, in plain lawful sight, moving the morning transfer. She set down the lens. Which is it, vinegar or daylight? What the recorders preserved of the next 11 seconds was silence broken once by the gallery. A single Olmain somewhere among the freight delegations, laughing his wet clicking laugh before his neighbors hushed him, laughing this time at the petition. I may have conflated the nights, Salobrem said at last, in the smallest voice the hall had heard from a witness ring in a generation. There were many festival nights. I served 4 seasons of them. You're a good host, Hale said without a gram of triumph. You remembered what the dock office needed odd, and the memory grew to fit. It happens to honest people constantly. It's half my caseload. No further questions. She paused, halfway turned and added, as though noting a delivery error on a docket. Though the tribunal might ask itself, later, who first suggested to the Vintner host that what he saw was human. Counsel will leave the tribunal's questions to the tribunal, Kais said, but the Bulvane's bulk had drifted forward over the dais rail and stayed there. The gradient extended the human's courtesy time that afternoon, on the tribunal's own motion. Unanimous, undebated, entered without comment between 2 scheduling items, which was how the Hall of Standing Names said the word respect. The petitioner's table answered the way nervous money always answered, which was procedurally. Tyrrell, on instruction from the estate office and over Calcera's unrecorded objection, filed a motion to bar the respondent's demonstrative theatrics, the hand lens, the swatch fans, the unexplained tin that had appeared on the exhibit shelf that morning and sat there, unopened, radiating narrative. The motion argued that counsel's props were unentered exhibits, prejudicing the gallery. It was heard at the next morning bell, and it took First Assessor Kais 90 seconds to dispose of. The tribunal has reviewed the inventory, Kais said. A magnifying lens, paper, graphite, fabric samples, and a tin. Advocate Osk, this hall has admitted siege plans, reactor core, and on one occasion, a live Death World predator under bond. It is not minded to be frightened of a biscuit tin. If the contents of the tin are tendered, they will be marked like anything else, denied. And the gradient observes, for the petitioner's guidance, that the surest way to make a gallery stare at an object is to file a motion about it. The gallery, in fairness, had needed no help. The clerk's betting book, which did not exist, the concourse being a place of law, was reported to be running heavily toward the tin containing the original frost gray wax seals. The estate's communications office tried the other obvious road the same week. It bought research. 3 firms of inquiry agents went down the human's record looking for the soft places. The abandoned credential, the censured matter, the client left burned, and came back with the most damaging dossier imaginable, which is to say none. 81 matters arbitrated, no appeals. 2 censures entered against opposing counsel for misciting her. A station hostler's testimonial describing her as the only arbiter who ever checked the laundry. The feeds leaked the dossier in the hope they would sneer at its smallness, read it aloud instead, slowly. While the public ledger did the arithmetic, the estate office had somehow failed to commission in advance. The human had been winning unglamorous fights about physical truth, at the rate of 1 a month for her entire adult life, and the petition had booked her as a novelty act. Calcera spent the recess day doing something she had not done since her advocacy was young. She went down to the docks herself, robes exchanged for the plain gray of her cast's off-floor wear, and stood on the cargo apron under the pavilion's long window and looked up. The window looked back, blank and bright. She paced the bonded lane to the receiving sheds. She found the night register kiosk and read the festival week entries with her clerk's authority, and found the entry for Brem's morning remark, logged not by the dock office's duty clerk, as Volume 6 attested, but transcribed into the dock log 2 days later by the estate steward's office, from a verbal report, attested again by the steward's office, the same office that had attested the wax extract, the same office whose lacquered signature sat at the bottom of fully a third of the documentary exhibits. Now that she was looking, and she sat that evening in her rented chambers with volumes 1 through 11 open on every surface and looked, properly looked, for the first time since the petition had arrived at her chambers with its retainer and its grief and its 11 generations of flattery. It was past middle night when Tyrrell found her there among the open volumes and stood in the doorway with the particular stillness of a junior who has finally caught up to a thought his senior had days ago and is afraid it might be contagious. "The steward's office," he said. "Sit down, Tyrrell." 41 exhibits route through the steward's attestation. "I counted tonight. I couldn't sleep, so I counted." He sat, his face had lost the first morning shine somewhere in the past week and not found it. Again. "Senior, the wax was poured at Ophale. The mold lives at Ophale. The eyewitness was edited at Ophale. I keep arranging it differently and it keeps coming out the same shape, and the shape is not sloppiness." "The shape," Calcera said evenly, because one of them had to be even, and it was contractually her, is consistent with sloppiness, with panic, with an estate office covering ordinary lapses in heritage protocol after the catastrophe made every lapse look like negligence. Frightened clerks falsify backwards. It does not require conspiracy. It requires only fear and an institution old enough to prefer its records perfect. Do you believe that? I am retained to put our client's case at its highest. I am rehearsing, Senior. Tyrrell's voice cracked on it very slightly, and Calcera thought, there it is. The precise sound a younger version of herself had never been permitted to make. What I performed. The folio, the items, the gallery. If the shape is what it looks like, then the funniest morning of my career was me reading out, in order, the list of qualifications that is going to take our case apart. I handed her the program. "Yes," Calcera said, "you did. Wax was item 5, and perfume was item 4, and protocol was somewhere in the middle. And if I were the sort to wager, she was not. Her cast did not. She heard herself reaching for the figure anyway and put it down with distaste. I would not need to. She isn't working through our witnesses, Tyrrell. She's working through her own resume, in the order you read it." Tyrrell was quiet for a long moment. "What do? We do what advocates of this house have done for 11 generations." Calcera closed the volume in front of her, the one with the steward's lacquered signatures. "We put our client's case at its highest, and we make our clients tell us the truth, in that order of priority, and where the two collide." She stopped. 11 generations had a great deal to say about retainers and very little to say about collisions. That was, she was coming to understand rather, the point of the 11 generations. "We request the original poor logs." the original dock register, and the original gala imaging from the estate in writing with a deadline, tonight. And if the estate declines, houses retain, Calcera said. Houses also reconsider. It works in both directions. The estate did not decline. The estate did something that Calcera, reconstructing events much later for the censure board with the recorders running, would identify as the moment her duty changed shape. The estate sent by return courier before dawn a complete, beautiful, internally consistent set of originals, poor logs, dock register, gala imaging, every page attested, every seal crisp, every date in order. And the poor logs paper was wrong. It was item 6 in the human's folio, table linens, sumptuary claims that supplied Calcera the verb for what she did next, alone at her desk in the small hours, with a document that her client swore was 3 seasons old. She did what any linen arbiter does with a suspect provenance. She held the page up to the lamp and read the weave. Calcera Vin knew nothing about paper, but the concourse's notarial office did, and notaries owe their first duty to the tribunal, not the parties. And the assay she commissioned privately, flat fee, sealed result, her own name on the requisition because doing it through a clerk would have been a fraud on the assay itself, came back in 2 lines. Stock consistent with current season estate manufacture. Surface lacquer applied within 90 days. Lacquer. There was that word again, loitering at the edge of the case the way the cut glass bottle had loitered on the alcove table. The estate finished its archival documents, as great houses did, with a thin proofing coat of Mistfield lacquer, the same preparation its gardeners painted on show vines before Gallus, the pride of the perfumery moons, sister product to Ophel gold. Mistfield turned up all over the exhibits the way the steward's signature did, on the documents and the garden inventories and the gala accounts, 90 days. The poor log, attesting the original wax seals of shipment TG-114, 3 seasons past, had been manufactured and lacquered while the petition was already before the tribunal. Calcera sat with the assay a long time. The trees were dead. That part was true. She had smelled the dying rose herself on the client inspection 2 seasons ago, the wet cellar smell of velvet bloom and living wood. An ancient woman's grief was true. And around those 2 true things, someone with access to the state's seals, stores, registers, and staff had built a case the way a confectioner builds a showpiece, poured, stamped, lacquered, beautiful, and bearing the same relation to fact that festal wax bore to bond. She did not yet have the who, although the steward's office attested 41 exhibits and offices are made of people. She did not have the why, although the petition's prayer for relief asked for an aquifer by name and the dying orchards drank more water every season. The soil got worse. That thought had begun arriving at night and refusing to leave. What she had was a duty of candor to the tribunal, a duty of zeal to a client. 11 generations of precedent that the two never collide if one's clients are who one's grandmother believed great. Houses to be, and a courier slot reserved for the morning. What she had above all of it was the next witness on her own list. The petition schedule, filed before the human had ever stood up, called the estate's keeper of grounds, the steward herself, Isserley Marne, to give the testimony the whole case had been built to deliver. The discovery of the blight, the morning of the rain, the dying of the glass orchards row by row with the gala imaging of the last healthy harvest as her exhibit and her grief as its frame. Calcera could withdraw the witness. Withdrawing her would gut the petition and the matriarch would reconsider, in the full sense, by nightfall. She could call her, suborning nothing, asking only the questions whose answers she had no proof were false, and let the record take its course. Or she could do the thing that had no precedent in 11 generations of her lying, the thing her grandmother did not have a word for, but the small wares circuit apparently did. She could let the catering table check the links. Call your witness, Advocate Vin, First Assessor Kai said the next morning. The petitioners call Isserley Marne, Calcera said, keeper of grounds of the Vendrassi estate, and her voice was level, because it had been trained to be level before she could read, and because somewhere under the gray robes, for the first time in this proceeding, she was no longer entirely sure whose case she was putting at its highest. Isserley Marne took the oath in Gardner's formal, estate green, the keeper's chain of office. Soil-stained hands she made no attempt to hide because the soil was the credential. 40 years in the glass orchards, keeper for 19. A broad, weathered Ophelian face built for honesty, and the hall warmed to her before she said a word, because the hall had spent 2 weeks watching paper witnesses fold, and here at last was somebody real, and she was real. That was the cruelty of it, Calcera thought, leading her gently through the early questions. The 40 years were real. The 19 as keeper were real. When she spoke of the orchards, of grafting in the prism light, of the singing the pickers did in the white rose, of trees she called by name the way one names ships, the gallery's grief was not managed by any communications office. It rose on its own. Tell the tribunal about the morning you found the blight, Calcera said. It was the morning after the grain came down. Marn's voice was low and certain. I was in the show rose early gala season. The harvest gala was 2 days out, and the show vines wanted dressing. Then the rain came on, hard out of season, and I went out into it to get the dressing cloths in. And I saw the first ring of white on the Empress. A tree's name. The hall knew it from the imaging. Somewhere in the gallery, silk rustled. Velvet bloom, fruiting through the bark. I have known that mark my whole working life. By the next morning, it was on 6 trees. By gala morning, 40. We held the gala anyway. The matriarch said 900 years had earned the trees their last party. Her stained hands tightened on the rail of the ring. It killed the show rose first and ate inward. There is nothing left to keep. I am a keeper of grounds, advocates. The grounds are dead. Calcera tendered the gala imaging through her, the famous holos, the white rose blazing under the prism panes, the last healthy harvest in the petition's telling, and asked the dates into the record, and sat down with her case, formally complete, and her assay report locked in her chamber's safe, and her conscience arranged in a holding pattern, and the tribunal recessed for the meridian. It was during that recess that the estate tried to buy the war off, which told Calcera more about the state of the petitioner's nerve than anything said in the hall. She was summoned to the garden tier at the recess bell. The matriarch's secretary did the talking while the matriarch watched the rented garden, through the window, cane planted, back straight. The offer was framed as mercy. The house would accept assignment of Green Hollow's aquifer rights alone, with the charter preserved, the surety untouched, a generous carriage contract sweetening the cup, all claims released, grief honored, everyone spared further circus. Calcera carried it back down to the concourse floor herself, because some instinct wanted to watch the human receive it. Juniper Hale read the offer sheet at the alcove table while finishing her tea, and Calcera stood in the unaccustomed position of waiting at the catering station with her hands folded. "Generous," Hale said at last. "Counsel, can I ask you a smallwares question? If you must. When a vendor's invoice is challenged and the vendor, before any finding, before the audit even closes, offers to settle for exactly one line item, and that line item happens to be the only thing on the invoice that holds its value forever, what does the offer tell the arbiter about the rest of the invoice?" Calcera said nothing. Saying nothing was, she found, fractionally less humiliating than saying it aloud. The Hale said, folding the sheet in half and in half again with the finality of a woman folding a napkin after a meal. 11 volumes about trees, and when it's nervous, the petition asks for the water. Green Hollow respectfully declines. "Tell your clients the colony will take its chances with the lynx." She paused. And for one moment the service counter mildness opened onto something older and flatter, the floor of the voice. 4,106 people, counsel. They drink that aquifer. It was never going to be yes. You knew the offer would come, Calcera said. "I've settled a lot of invoices," Hale said mild again and went back to her tea. The refusal cost the colony before the afternoon bell. Calcera learned of it the way the hall learned of everything. Through the clerk's corridor at recess speed. 3 verge carriage lines, every one of them moving freight for the Orchard family's allied trade houses, had abruptly found scheduling difficulties with Green Hollow's outbound grain bookings. No embargo, nothing actionable, merely a colony's entire harvest season politely unable to find a hull, with the surety hearings pending and the colony's accounts needing that grain revenue to keep its own advocate fed. Was the squeeze as old as commerce, lose in the hall slowly, starve at the dock fast. It lasted 4 days. Calcera obtained the filings afterward for instruction and kept them. The human had not protested, petitioned the tribunal, or gone to the feeds. She had gone to the tariff registry. Items 1 and 9 of her folio turned out to include the Vergy's common carriage conventions, the bonded route obligations every licensed line accepted in exchange for its monopoly lanes, and her 3 filings, 1 per carrier, simply scheduled rate and refusal audits of each line's full perishables book, as any carriage-rated arbiter was entitled to request, with the first audit listed for the height of the nectar shipping season. The scheduling difficulties resolved in 31 hours. The third line sent a vice factor to the concourse to apologize in person, and was seen leaving the alcove table with the stunned expression of a being that had arrived expecting a negotiation and been served tea, a biscuit, and a withdrawn audit notice inside 10 minutes. "I don't want their lunch," Hale told the Reeve audibly as the vice factor retreated. "I want the grain moving. Punishment is for halls. We're a shop." Tyrrell read the filings too. Calcera watched him do it, watched him sit with the tariff conventions open beside the audit notices, and watched the exact moment the junior understood that the human's folio was not a list of small things but a list of choke points, that everything in the galaxy that mattered traveled, sooner or later, as somebody's perishable cargo, under somebody's wax, on somebody's schedule, and the woman at the catering table held certified authority over all three. "Senior," he said, "we didn't underestimate her credentials. We underestimated credentials." The afternoon belonged to the cross-examination the feeds had been promising each other for days, and the hall was full past its rated capacity. Delegations standing along the back rail, clerks doubled at the recorders, the matriarch front and center in fresh morning silk with her cane planted before her like a standard. The garnish advocate takes the gardener, the morning captions had run, and even the kind ones had a head tilt in them, because Isserley Marne was not a wax seal or a fee-fed consultant. She was 40 years of soil, and the public ledger's instinct said the human would finally overreach. And the public ledger wanted to be there when she did. Hale came to the ring with the pad, the lens, and Calcera marked it the way an artillery officer marks a battery unmasking, a flat tin from the carpet bag which she set on the ring's exhibit shelf unopened. "Keeper Marne," she began, 40 years. "I want to say before anything else that your rose were the finest thing the Verge ever grew, and everything I'm about to ask assumes you love them. All right? You can't soften me, child. Wasn't trying. I find people are hardest to mislead about the things they love, so your love is actually my best evidence. Let's start 2 days before the rain." She consulted the pad. "Gala season. You testified the Chauvines wanted dressing, and you were in the show rows early to dress them. Dressing the Chauvines, for the record, that's the gala preparation. The leaves are cleaned, the fruit thin for display, and the vines are finished with Mistveil lacquer. Yes? Every gala for 19 years. Tell the tribunal about Mistveil, what it is, how it goes on." A flicker of the keeper's eyes, not alarm yet. The puzzlement of an expert asked to recite the obvious. "Leaf dressing from the perfumery works. Goes on as a mist, cures to a gloss. Makes the rose shine under the prisms. The pickers call it putting the trees in their jewels. How long does it take to cure? A day and a night? About." And while it cures, Hale's voice did not change at all, which was how the whole hall knew to stop breathing. "What are the conditions? Keeper, you've laid it on 19 galas of vines. What does Mistveil need between misting and gloss?" "Dry air," Isserley Marne said. "Still dry air. We tent the rose if there's weather coming. What happens if it's rained on, mid-cure?" "Silence. Not the witness's silence first. The halls, the gallery arriving at the cliff edge a half-second before the witness saw it, 2,000 spectators doing the arithmetic of a day and a night against a hard rain the very next morning. "It blooms," the keeper said. Very slowly, a woman watching her own words walk away from her. "The gloss goes, it cures gray, blotched. Permanently? You'd strip it and lay it fresh. There's no saving a rain cure. Thank you now." Hale turned the pad's page with a sound that carried to the 9th tier of the gradient. "Your testimony this morning. You dressed the Chauvines early. The rain came on hard. You went out into it for the dressing cloths, and you found the first bloom ring on the Empress. The gala was held 2 days later. The petition's own imaging of that gala is Exhibit 14. The holos this tribunal has watched a dozen times. The white rose in their jewels. Keeper Marne. The brass lens came up, and this time it was not ceremony. I've spent a week with Exhibit 14 and a hired imaging analyst, and the Chauvines in those holos carry a flawless, unbroken, high-gloss Mistveil cure. No graying, no blotch. No strip and redress. Your own garden inventory, Volume 10, shows no second drawing of Mistveil stock that week, and a redress of the show rose draws more lacquer than your works release in a month. So here is my problem, and I genuinely like your help with it, because there are only 2 ways out and I don't get to choose for you." She lowered the lens. "If you misted the Chauvines that morning and the rain caught the cure, the gala vines should be gray, and they are perfect. And if you never misted them at all, then you were not in the show rose that morning, and the tribunal is entitled to ask where you were, and why the cornerstone of this petition, the discovery of the blight, the morning, the rain, the Empress, is a scene that the lacquer says never happened." Isserley Marne stood in the witness ring with her soil-stained hands locked on the rail, and the Hall of Standing Names watched a 40-year keeper search for a third way out with the desperate thoroughness of a woman who knew the rose better than the people, and the lacquer held both exits shut, because chemistry does not take attestation. "The holos could be from the prior gala," she said at last, barely audible. "Volume 10 again." Hale did not even raise the lens. "The petition's own exhibit index dates the imaging by the gala's commissioning seal, current season, and item 6 of my folio is sumptuary claims, keeper, which means I have spent 8 years dating fabric, and the matriarch's morning silks in the back of frame 9 are this year's weave, from a lot her own house accounts received 40 days before the gala. The holos are the holos. The lacquer is the lacquer." A pause, and then, with the same terrible gentleness she had offered the vintner host, "You loved those rows, Keeper Marne. I believe every word of that. So tell the tribunal the true version, because the trees are owed at least one honest witness before this is over, and I think you'd rather it was you. The keeper looked at the petitioner's table. Calcera had spent 30 years reading the looks witnesses send to the tables that called them. Pleas for rescue, demands for objection, the drowning reaching for the boat. This was none of those. Isili Marn looked at the matriarch's table the way the human had looked at the settlement sheet, like an invoice whose one good line item had finally been found. Objection, Tyrrell said into the silence, rising, because someone at the petitioner's table had to, and Calcera had not moved. Counsel invites narrative. She invites testimony. First Assessor Kai said, "It is what the ring is for. The witness will answer." And Isili Marn, keeper of grounds, took her hands off the rail, straightened her chain of office as though dressing a vine for its last gala, and answered. The glass orchards were dying 2 seasons before the human grain ever lifted off its moon. She said it to the gradient, not to either table, and the recorders caught moment the Hall of Standing Names stopped being a courtroom and became what it had been built to be 6 centuries ago, before the marble and the manors, a place where worlds find out what is true, not blight, exhaustion. The works expanded. The perfumery moons trebled their draw. The estate trebled the orchard's bearing schedule to cover the loans, and you cannot treble 900-year-old rootstock. We stripped the soil. I sent the assays to the estate office myself, 2 seasons running. Fallow the East Rows, I wrote, or lose them. I have copies. I kept copies of everything, because I am a keeper. It is the whole of the job description. Her voice stayed level the way ground stays level on a slope, by visible effort. The answer came back that the orchard secured the house's credit, that a fallow season published to the lenders would do what no blight could, and that I was to manage decline discreetly. Manage decline, in rows my grandmother grafted. Her hands found the rail again. Then the bloom came. Not from any grain pod. From our own works, the vat cultures ride the irrigation return when the filters are run past rating, and everything on that estate was being run past rating. I found the first white ring on the Empress 39 days before the human shipment came down. 39 days, advocates. I reported it the same hour, and the estate office sent back that evening not a treatment order, a schedule. The grain was already in transit, and the schedule said the bloom would be discovered after it landed. Who? First Assessor Kai said, and the Bolvain's voice had lost all its drift, wrote the schedule. The factor's office. Factor Dre Olven over his own seal. Isili Marn looked, once, at the matriarch, and what was in the look was worse than accusation. It was apology. He told me the house could survive a poisoning, but not a failure. That the lenders would forgive an act of war against the trees, and would never forgive bad stewardship of them. That the humans had insurance, and a surety and a tribunal to protect them, and the house had only its name. And that if I loved the people who worked those rows, 400 families, advocates, my own among them, I would remember what I was keeper of. A long breath. So the discovery was written before it happened. The rain morning was chosen off the weather almanac. The dressing cloths, the Empress, the running out into the storm. The factor's clerks drafted my witness statement before the storm formed. I dressed no vines that morning. There were no show vines fit to dress. What stood in the show rows by gala season had been trucked in at night and grafted to the old stumps like wigs on the dead, so the holos would show the world a healthy harvest dying suddenly, instead of a dead estate dying slow. The seals, Hale said quietly, from the ring's edge. Not a challenge anymore. A clerk completing an inventory. Poured at the receiving sheds the week the petition was drafted. The original wax came down frost gray and split. The pods had been opened and resealed at our docks for sampling years of shipments. It was routine. And gray split wax photographs adly. The keeper's mouth made something that was almost a smile and entirely a wound. The factor's office wanted the exhibits beautiful. The banquet stores had indigo. And the vintner host was asked, helpfully, whether what he half remembered might have been humans. People are usually willing to have seen what kind people suggest they saw. The factor is a kind man, counsel. That is the thing nobody will believe afterward. Every cruelty on that estate was done kindly, one reasonable step at a time, by people protecting other people from the truth about money. The hall's silence had texture now, currents in it. The orchard family sat in their mourning silk, like people discovering the funeral had been for someone else. The Olmain delegations had stopped clicking entirely. Along the gradient, the 9 assessors had gone as still as their own wall of names, and the standing names burned on, world after world, charter after charter, and Calcera Vince sat at the petitioner's table with 11 generations of advocacy in her blood, and watched her case die in witness ring, and noticed, with the part of her mind that never stopped taking notes, that the human had stepped back from the rail. Hale had moved 2 paces away from the keeper, out of the recorder's frame, and stood with her hands folded and her eyes down, giving the witness the room. Declining, on the largest stage the Verge had to offer, and with total victory pouring across her table like spilled wine, to be in the picture for it. Item 9, Calcera thought, with hysteria's first faint fingerprint. Perishable goods carriage. Even the wind was being handled cold chain, nothing allowed to spoil. Keeper Marn, Kais again, slow. You have just confessed before this tribunal to attesting falsified exhibits in a charter revocation proceeding. You understand what attaches to that. I have understood it for 3 seasons, First Assessor. It is why I kept the copies. For the first time, the keeper's voice cracked through to whatever was underneath. The trees were owed one honest witness. The young woman said so herself. I have been 40 years in those rows, and I will not have the last thing the glass orchards do in this universe be the murder of 4,000 farmers who never touched them. The witnesses' copies, Kais said into the hall's held breath, will be surrendered to the tribunal's clerks within the hour. The petition is suspended. The gradient will sit in conclave. Advocate Vin and the Bulvain's regard came around and down like a searchlight, and Calcera rose into it because her body knew the protocols even while the rest of her was elsewhere. The tribunal requires the attendance of Factor Drael Ven and notes for the record that he sits in this hall's 3rd gallery and has just stood up. Every head in the hall of standing names turned. The factor, a tall silvered Ophelian in a state formal, kindly-faced, the man who had administered 900 years of trees and 400 families and 1 catastrophe of arithmetic, stood frozen between his bench and the exit arch, in the precise posture of a being who had risen to leave quietly and learned, in front of 2,000 witnesses and every feed in the verge, that there is no such thing as leaving a tribunal quietly. The 3rd gallery has excellent acoustics, Kais observed into the silence. It is why we seat the parties' households there. Sit down, Factor. The tribunal will want you rested. The conclave took 2 days, and they were the strangest 2 days of Calcera Vin's professional life. She spent the first morning doing the only unambiguous thing left on her list. She went to the tribunal's notarial office with Tyrrell as witness and surrendered, under the duty of candor, the paper assay she had commissioned and the unentered poor record extract and a memorandum over her own seal, itemizing every exhibit in volumes 1 through 11 that routed through the steward's attestation. 41, Tyrrell's count had been exact, together with the dates on which doubts had formed in her own mind, which the rules required, and which she set down without varnish, because varnish this season had developed a way of testifying. The record will show counsel's disclosure was tendered after the collapse of her witness, the notarial register said, neutrally, stamping. The record will show that, Calcera agreed. Stamp it twice. The second thing she did was resign the brief, or attempt to. The matriarch received her in the rented garden one last time, and this time there was no secretary and no dinner, just the old woman and the cane and the cut flowers going brown in their vases because the household staff had stopped being paid attention to. You will not resign, Austrain Vendrasi said. You will stand beside this house while it burns. That is what retainers of your line are for. 11 generations advocate. 11 generations of putting our clients' cases at their highest, Calcera said. Madam, as of the keeper's testimony, your case at its highest is a guilty plea tendered early. I am required to tell you that. I am also required to ask you, once formally, and I want you to weigh the answer, because I am the last person in the verge still obliged to believe it. She paused. Did you know? The matriarch looked at the dying flowers for a long time. I knew the trees were tired, she said at last. I knew Olveni would manage it. I did not ask how. Asking how is for people who can afford answers, and this house has not been able to afford answers for 30 years. There is your testimony, advocate. I never asked. 900 years, and the epitaph is, she never asked. The cane turned, once under her folded hands, the human girl, the one my house seated with the tea urns. Something moved through the ancient face that was almost terribly amusement. She would have asked. Yes, Calcera said. It appears to be her entire profession. Stand beside the house, Advocate Vin. Someone of quality should be in frame when the name comes off the wall. The matriarch turned back to the window. Besides, you are the only person on this station who has lost almost as much face as I have. We are practically kin. Calcera bowed, because 11 generations of muscle memory bowed for her and went down to prepare for the resumption, and found Tyrrell in chambers with the feeds spread out before him and an expression she had not seen on him before. Not the first morning shine, not the doorway dread. Something new that sat oddly on his smooth young face and that she eventually identified with a small shock as the early symptoms of judgment. They recalled the Vintner Host statement transcription, he said, and the dock register, and the weather almanac requisitions, and the graph stock receipts for the gala. The tribunal's clerks. They're rebuilding our 11 volumes from the originals out, overnight, all of them. Kais has the notarial office running triple shifts. He looked up. Senior. The human sent the clerks a memorandum this afternoon. 6 lines. I have a copy because everyone has a copy. It's the most forwarded document on the concourse. She suggested to the Tribunal of Charters and Claims that when they reach the gala graph stock receipts, they check the supplier's tag registry. That's all. One line of substance and a courteous closing. Which item is tag registries? Calcera asked, and heard in her own flat delivery how completely the proceeding had rewired her. 8, Tyrrell said. Ornamental horticulture trade standards. He laid the folio copy on the desk between them like a man surrendering a weapon. It's the last one, Senior. She's used the whole list. There's nothing left in the folio but the table linens, and I have personally watched her use the table linens. Then tomorrow, Calcera said, the factor takes the ring and we will discover what the tag registry says, and you and I will sit at that table and represent what is left of a great house while a small wares arbiter finishes our case for the tribunal. She straightened her gray robes, 11th of her line, and discovered the line's store of consolations was empty, so she used one of the humans instead. It fit better than she expected. Sit up straight, Advocate Osk. We'll find out together. The resumed session opened with a piece of business nobody had scheduled. Before the Gradient could call its witness, the Bonded Freight Guild's delegation rose in the second gallery, the Ulmani in their formal lattices, the same wet-clicking benches that had laughed first and loudest on the first morning, and Freight Master Corridolf came down to the clerk's rail, carrying a single log page in his enormous, careful grip. The guild begs the floor for 1 minute, he rumbled. Not testimony, a correction. Kais allowed it. The hall had learned to allow things. My log of the TG-114 transfer says, seals verified. I have amended it. It now says, seal appearances verified against a register supplied by an interested party, provenance not established. The error is the freight master's. My print is beside the amendment. He laid the page on the rail with the delicacy of a crane setting a keystone. 31 years, advocates, 9,000 transfers. The guild teaches that the log is the cargo's memory, and a memory that flatters its keeper is a forgery. The human council did not break my log. She found the page where I had let someone else write in it. The feeding arms made the triple tap, slow and deliberate, certainty reannounced on the far side of its humbling. The guild has also withdrawn carriage bond from the Vendrassi estate pending the assize. We do not move what we cannot verify. We are told the humans have a saying for it. A pause. The great plated head inclined toward the alcove. Check the links. The amendment is received, Kais said. The saying is now in the record, Freight Master, where it is likely to remain. Factor Dre Olven came to the witness ring rested, exactly as the first assessor had prescribed, and the hall understood within 4 sentences why a dying house had trusted this man with its arithmetic for 30 years. He did not look like a fraud. Frauds in the public imagination perspire. The factor stood in the ring with his silvered crest smoothed and his estate formal pressed, and radiated the mild, capable sorrow of a physician at a deathbed. And when the tribunal's own examiner, conclave rules, the Gradient had taken the witness for itself, put the keeper's testimony to him point by point. He did not deny it so much as grieve over it. Keeper Marn is the finest groundskeeper in the Verge, he said, and she has watched her life's work die. And I would ask the tribunal to weigh what that does to a mind before it weighs what that mind now remembers. Did my office correspond with her about the soil? Constantly, it was our gravest shared concern. Did I write that we must manage decline discreetly? I wrote those words about the lender's examiner, about the timing of disclosures to the credit houses, a commonplace of estate administration that I am content to defend line by line. She has taken a season of desperate, ordinary correspondence and rearranged it in pure grief into a plot. A sorrowing pause, beautifully weighted. I do not blame her. I will not hear her blamed. But grief is not a schedule, and there is no schedule. There is only a broken keeper and a house that loved its trees too much to publish their dying. Her copies, the examiner said, include a memorandum over your seal, dated 39 days before the human shipment landed, containing the phrase discovery to follow receipt. Discovery of the soil assays examiner, to follow receipt of the season's full sampling. The phrase is from a workflow digest. My office issues 40 such digests a season, pulled from its file and held to this lamp anything glows. He gestured gently at the whole apparatus of the hall. That is what lamps are for. It is why we have tribunals, and not just keepers with copies. And the hall, Calcera felt it happen around her like weather, began just perceptibly to settle back. It was the costume of reasonableness, and it was flawless. And 2,000 spectators who had spent 2 days inside a collapsing scandal discovered how badly they wanted the world, managed by calm silver administrators, after all. The feeds that evening would split for the first time in a week. The keeper's grief, the house-friendly captions ran. Tyrrell, at Calcera's left, was watching the Gradient with an analyst's despair. 3 of the 9 assessors had visibly eased. He's going to survive it, Tyrrell breathed, Senior. He's actually going to survive it. The wax is the steward's office, The transcription is the steward's office. The statement drafts are the steward's office. He's built it so every road ends at the one being in this case who has already confessed. She kept copies for 3 seasons, and he spent 3 seasons making sure the copies would incriminate the keeper. Yes, Calcera said. It is the best construction I have ever seen. She said it the way one says it of a gallows. Her own name was on 11 volumes of that construction. The examiner worked another hour and could not crack the surface. The factor regretted, contextualized, and gently bled the scandal white. And then the gradient did the thing that the Hall of Standing Names had been edging toward for 2 weeks. The thing without precedent in the standing orders, but well within the tribunal's discretion over its own ring. The tribunal has exhausted its present questions, First Assessor Kais said. Before the witness stands down, Madam Hale, the gradient observes that the respondent has to date asked the most instructive questions heard on this floor. The ring is yours if you want it. The hall came forward on its benches as one body. The factor turned to face the alcove table with the unhurried courtesy of a man greeting a junior colleague, and if there was anything under the courtesy, he had it tented and curing where no rain could reach. The human came to the ring carrying the pad, the lens, and the flat tin from the carpet bag, the one she had set on the exhibit shelf, unopened, on the day of the lacquer, and quietly retrieved, and the hall had spent 2 days, not knowing it was waiting to find out what was in it. Factor Ulven, thank you for your patience. Mine is a small docket of questions. She set the tin on the shelf again. You administer the estate's procurement. Everything bought you buy, my office buys. 40 clerks, I sign. You sign. The gala, the famous gala, 2 days after the rain. The keeper testified the show rows were dressed with brought-in stock, grafted overnight. You heard her. Your office's graft stock receipts are now with the tribunal's clerks. 12 lots of mature ornamental fruiting vine, supplier on bris, delivered to the estate by night freight. Do you dispute the receipts? I dispute the construction. The sorrowing mildness again. The estate buys ornamental stock every gala season, Madam Hale. Display vines for the pavilions, the guest walks, the float barges. 12 lots is a quiet year. If the keeper, in her distress, grafted display stock into the show rows, that is heartbreaking, and it is the first I hear of it. Hale turned a page. Item 8 of my accreditation factor. Ornamental horticulture trade standards. I sat 4 seasons on the Verge Trade Fair arbitration panel. Disputes over mislabeled stock, mostly sellers passing young vines as mature. It's a plague in your industry. So the trade standard now requires every lot of mature ornamental vine to carry sealed graft tags, a little ceramic collar fired onto the rootstock, stamped with the supplier, the cultivar, and the certification date. They cannot be removed without shattering, and they're fired in the kiln on the day of sale. I've held a few thousand of them. She looked up. The tribunal's clerks pulled the tags from the grafted stumps in the show rows yesterday at my suggestion. 41 tags survived the orchard's death intact. Ceramic doesn't care about blight. They are in evidence as of this morning. Factor. Would you like to tell the tribunal the certification dates fired into those collars, or shall I? The factor's crest did not move. His hands did not move. But somewhere in the ring, in the half-second before he spoke, the deathbed physician warmth banked itself, like a lamp being thriftily turned down to save oil for a longer night than planned. I have no doubt the dates are in evidence, he said. They are. 41 tags, 12 lots, 1 kiln. Hale read from the pad conversationally, a vendor confirming a delivery window. Every certification date falls within the same 9-day span. The latest is 12 days before the human shipment TG-114 landed at your docks. The earliest is 20 days before. She let the pad fall to her side. Factor Ulven, your office bought the mature display vines to dress the dead show rows for the gala, bought them, fired tags and all, while the human grain was still in transit. Before the rain, before the Empress, before the discovery your office's almanac picked the weather for. The keeper didn't graft wigs onto the dead in a fit of grief. Factor. You ordered the wigs while the corpse was still officially alive, because the funeral had already been scheduled around the arrival of someone to blame. Objection, said the House's emergency retained criminal counsel from the third table, newly seated that morning and visibly regretting every life choice that had led there. Counsel testifies. Counsel arithmetizes, Kais said. Overruled. Factor procurement lead times, the factor said, for mature stock run long. A prudent office buys ahead of gala season. Ahead of a gala and rows your own soil assays said we're dying. To a delivery schedule that happens to bracket a blight nobody had discovered yet. Hale nodded slowly, as though he had said something genuinely useful. Let's do lead times then. 1 more purchase, factor, and then the tin, a rustle through the hall. The tin had its own following by now. The tribunal's clerks, rebuilding volume 11 from originals, found the draft of this petition's prayer for relief in your office's document system. Drafts carry creation seals, like graph tags for paper. That's item 6, by the way. Document standards live next door to sumptuary. The seals are why nobody forges drafts, only finals. The draft prayer asks this tribunal for revocation of the Green Hollow Charter, forfeiture of surety, and assignment of the Caro Aquifer rights. A beat. Creation seal, 8 days before shipment TG-114 landed. 31 days before the first soil sample left your estate for any laboratory. Your office asked for the human's water, in writing, before the blight existed in any record anywhere in the universe, including yours. She tilted her head and her voice, mild as ever, simply set the thing down on the floor of the hall where everyone could see it. Lead times factor. How far ahead does a prudent office buy its verdicts? This time the silence had no texture and no currents. It was total. The silence of 2,000 beings declining to breathe at the same moment, and in the middle of it, Factor Dreolven stood looking at a 26-year-old human, while every reasonable, kindly, administrative road out of the witness ring, the roads he had spent 3 seasons paving, shattered like ceramic, one tag at a time. I wish to consult counsel, he said at last to the gradient, in a voice from which the oil had run entirely out. The tribunal expects you do, Kai said. Sit down, Factor. Madam, hail the tin? Oh, the human picked it up, popped the lid with a thumb, and the hall of standing names, gradient, galleries, recorders, feeds, the assembled jurisprudence of 40 worlds, leaning forward as one organism to learn what final instrument the garnish advocate had held in reserve through the unraveling of a great house, beheld a layer of small, round, golden-baked objects in paper cups. Biscuits, Hale said, from the colony. Green Hollow bakes them for tribunal days. It's a settler habit. You bring food to the building where your fate is being decided, in case it goes badly and you have to make friends. She set the open tin on the clerk's rail by the tea urns and her own small table. They've been in my bag for 2 weeks. I kept waiting for a day the hall had earned them. No further questions, First Assessor. It should not have worked. Calcera ran it through every professional instrument she owned, that evening and for years afterward. The timing, the bathos, the sheer impudence of closing the most devastating cross-examination in living memory with baked goods, it should have died as a stunt, and instead the laughter that finally broke across the hall of standing names was enormous and helpless and strangely clean, the laughter of a room that had been holding the case's full weight for 2 weeks and was being handed, by the person who had carried the heaviest share, permission to set it down. Even 2 of the assessor's clerks were seen to take a biscuit. The recorders entered the tin into the day's exhibit log because nobody could establish that they shouldn't, and the exhibit log of the Vendrasi petition closes in the permanent records of the Tribunal of Charters and Claims with the entry, Respondents Demonstrative 12, shortbread 1 tin, partially consumed. At the petitioner's table, Tyrell Osk put his face in his hands. Calcera, beside him, did not. She sat upright in her gray robes and watched the human pack the lens and the pad into the carpet bag, and made the final entry in the private list she had been keeping since the wax. Item 5, wax, the freight master. Item 4, perfume, the consultant. Banquet protocol, the vintner host. Item 6, sumptuary and documents. The gala silks, the lacquered paper, the creation seals. Item 8, tags, the factor. Item 9, perishables. The offer declined cold, the witness handled cold, nothing allowed to spoil. An item, whatever the biscuits were. There had been nothing in the folio about biscuits. Calcera was forced to conclude the human had brought some capacities to the concourse entirely uncertified, and that mercy was apparently among them, and that she had deployed it the way she deployed everything else. At the exact moment the room needed it, in the plainest available container, without looking at the gallery even once, Senior Tyrrell said muffled through his hands. When the censure board convenes on us, whatever they ask me. He raised his head, his eyes were terrible and young. I'm going to tell them about the first morning, the folio, all of it. I'd rather it came from me. Yes, Calcera said, you are finally ready to practice law. The House of Vendrasi did not survive the night, in the way that mattered to the credit ledgers. The lenders had watched the same feeds as everyone else, and lenders do not wait for verdicts. By the time the concourse's lamps cycled to morning, 3 credit houses had called their notes. The Perfumery Moon's forward contracts were suspended, and the white yachts along the orbital rail had begun, one by one, to file departure plans like guests leaving a party where someone has died. Upstairs, Calcera spent the night doing an advocate's last sad offices, emergency filings to protect the estate's 400 families from the receivers, a motion to sequester the workers' pension pools before the lenders reached them, the unglamorous masonry of collapse. Somewhere past middle night, she became aware that she was no longer drafting alone. A memorandum arrived from the alcove table's terminal, unasked, 6 lines long, flagging a verge labor law provision that shielded agricultural guild pensions from charter action creditors, a provision Calcera, had never once needed in 11 volumes of heritage practice, and which the smallware circuit apparently used, Hale's note observed all the time. Green Hollow has no objection to the workers' funds being fenced off first, the last line read. They didn't poison anybody either. Calcera filed it under both their names. Because candor had become a habit the way falling becomes a habit once the floor is gone, and because the recorders might as well preserve the season's final absurdity, Petitioners' Council and Respondents' Council jointly moving at 4 in the morning to protect the gardeners. The Gradient reconvened 2 days later to dispose of the petition, and the Hall of Standing Names dressed itself for the occasion in its oldest ceremony. All 9 assessors descended to the floor tier. Calcera had seen it done twice in 30 years, both times for revocations, and the Wall of Standing Names was lit in full. 6 centuries of charters burning floor to vault, so that whatever the tribunal did next would be done in front of all of them. The matriarch came too. That prized the Feeds, who had been promised a fugitive ancient hiding in a stripped residence. Instead, Austrain Vendrassi crossed the floor on her cane in mourning silk, now doing double duty. Attended by no one, the secretary had resigned by feed post, a final small cowardice, and before the session was gavelled in, while the hall stood in its delegations and watched, she walked the long way around the witness ring to the refreshments alcove, and stopped before the small table and the carpet bag and the human. The recorders caught it all. The directional pickups caught most of it. The Verge has been quoting it since. My house seated you with the caterers, the matriarch said. Your house was right, Hale said. Best view in the hall. Everyone's hands are at table height. The old alien stood for a moment, working through it. The gallery could watch the sentence land in stages. The insult sought and not found. The courtesy sought and not found. The thing actually present in its place. A flat statement of method offered free from one professional to another. The matriarch's hands tightened and settled on the cane's head. 900 years, she said. And it ends with wax and tags in a biscuit tin. My fathers would not comprehend it. With respect, ma'am, the human said, it ends with soil. Everything after the soil was just packaging. And then, because the hall was listening and the old woman's spine was, in its ruinous way, magnificent, the East Rose could have been fallowed. The keeper's assay said so. 2 seasons of published honesty, and your name stays on that wall. Cheaper than my colony's water, even with the loans. If it's any comfort, most of my invoices die the same way. Nobody ever lies about the big number. They lie about the little one early and then spend a fortune protecting it. It is no comfort whatever, the matriarch said, and it is the only true accounting anyone has given me in 30 years. She inclined her head, a degree, perhaps 2, the angle she had once spent on Calcera's opening statement, and took her seat among the ruins of her delegation, upright, to hear it read. The disposition took First Assessor Kais less than an hour, and the Verges Law Archives have catalogued it under the dry citation, Inri Greenhollow. Charter, but the recorders preserve what the citation flattens. The Bulvane low over the floor tier, gas chambers stilled, the lit wall behind, and the items falling one by one like the strokes of a dock bell. The petition, dismissed with prejudice, the tribunal finding it founded in fabricated exhibits and brought for the purpose of acquiring, by fraud on this hall, indemnity to which no particle of entitlement existed. The Green Hollow Charter, affirmed, and the hall drew one collective breath, reinscribed, the tribunal exercising a ceremony it had not used in 2 centuries, by which a charter that survives a revocation attempt unstained is rewritten on. The wall and the brighter leaf of vindicated standing. The colony's surety, released with interest. Costs to the petitioners in full. The Caro Aquifer, confirmed to Green Hollow in perpetuity, with a tribunal notation entered at the respondent's request, that the water serves 4,106 registered inhabitants, and counting. The notation says, because Hale had asked for those 2 words, and Kais had allowed them, and somewhere in the official permanent record of the Tribunal of Charters and claims there is now a birth announcement standing open forever, Factor Drael Ven, referred to the criminal assize of the Verge, in custody on counts of fraud upon a tribunal, fabrication of instruments, and conspiracy, and the tribunal took the unusual step of impounding his office's document system entire, creation seals and all, as a single exhibit. Keeper Isili Marn, referred likewise with a finding of substantial mitigating candor entered in advance, the tribunal observing that her copies had shortened the proceeding by a season, and her testimony had been, in the hall's formal language, of singular service to the truth. She surrendered her chain of office at the rail. It is recorded that Reeve Tomas Fair of Greenhollow, a gray, quiet man who had sat unnoticed through the entire proceeding behind his young advocate, rose at that point without asking anyone's leave and said that a colony of farmers could always use a keeper who knew sick soil when she saw it, whatever the assize decided, and that the offer had no expiry date, and that the keeper of the dead glass orchids looked at him for a long moment, and then nodded, once, the way ground nods when it finally stops sliding. The House of Vendrassi. Its remaining estates placed under tribunal supervised receivership, with the workers' pension pools fenced from creditors per the joint motion of council. Kais read the words joint motion of council without inflection, and let them sit in the record like a small stone monument to the strangeness of the season. And then the gradient turned to the lawyers. The tribunal comes last to the conduct of counsel, Kais said, and it will take the junior first. Tyrrell Osk stood. He had asked Calcera the night before what one wore to one's own censure, and she had told him the truth, the same robes. The robes are the point. You stand in what you stood in, and he stood now in the same chambers gray as that first morning, before a hall that remembered the laughter in 3 flavors, and he did not wait for the particulars to be read. First assessor, I'll save the examiner the file, he said. On the first morning of this petition, I took a young advocate's accreditation folio and read it to this. Hall is a comedy routine. I had vetted nothing about her. I knew nothing about her. I mocked the wax certification, and the wax broke our freight evidence. I mocked the perfume certification, and the perfume broke our science. I mocked the banquet law and the lacquer and the linens and the tags, and every single item I read for a laugh walked into this ring in the order I read it and took our case apart, because the person I was laughing at had spent 8 years learning what things actually do, while I spent them learning how things look. He breathed. The tribunal will note I was also wrong about the folio's length. I said 9 items. There were 11. I stopped reading at 9 because the gallery had laughed 3 times by then, and I have asked myself every night for 2 weeks what items 10 and 11 are, and I am afraid the answer is that I will spend my career finding out the way I found out the others. The hall did not laugh. The hall had learned. The tribunal finds the junior's conduct unbecoming and his accounting of it complete, Kai said. Reprimand entered. Advocate Osk, the gradient has watched advocates twice your age spend whole careers not arriving where you arrived in 2 weeks. The reprimand will sit in your file beside that observation. They are to be read together. A drift of the great translucent bulk. There is, additionally, a matter of amends within this tribunal's gift, and the gradient is disposed to be exact about it. The record of this petition's first morning contains a recitation. The tribunal finds the recitation was made in a mocking register, incomplete, and for an improper purpose, and that it has been relied upon since by every feed in the Verge as a catalogue of the respondent counsel's deficiencies. The record will be corrected at this session's close, by the same voice. Tyrrell bowed his head and sat, and the gradient turned and Calcera Vin rose without being called, because she had been the daughter of this hall her whole life, and she knew its rhythms the way the keeper had known sick soil. Senior Advocate Vin, Kai said, the tribunal has reviewed your disclosure to the notarial office, its contents, and its date. So have I, First Assessor, many times. Calcera folded her hands. She had prepared remarks. She could feel them in her sleeve, measured, mitigating, professionally engineered, 11 generations of knowing precisely how much contrition buys how much mercy. She left them in the sleeve. The tribunal will permit me to be brief, since brevity has been this season's most instructive import. I signed 11 volumes I had not pressure tested, because they came to me beautiful, from a great house, attested and sealed and lacquered, and my line has trusted beautiful paper from great houses for 11 generations. That trust was the whole of my inheritance, and I find it was a clerical error compounding for 3 centuries. When the wax broke, I held my doubts in a drawer. When the paper assay came back, I held it 3 more days. Weighing duties, I should have weighed in an afternoon. My disclosure beat the collapse to the registrar's stamp by hours, and the record should say plainly that it would not have existed at all, but for the certainty that the young woman at the catering table was going to find everything anyway. She paused. She made candor cheap, First Assessor. That is the kindest thing I can say about my own conduct, and the truest thing I can say about hers. An advocate of my standing should not need her integrity repriced by the opposing table. Mine was. Enter what the tribunal sees fit. Reprimand with a finding of eventual candor, Kai said, and a direction, Advocate Vin, which the gradient suspects is redundant but enters anyway. Your chambers train 1/3 of the heritage advocates in the Verge. The tribunal directs that your curriculum henceforth and include instruction in the forensic value of the Bulvain consulted nothing. The Bulvain had clearly been waiting all session for this. Wax, paper, lacquer, fabric, nectar, perfume, and ceramic tags. The standing orders do not provide a name for this discipline. The tribunal is informed the humans call it small wares. The direction is accepted, Calcera said, and was anticipated. The 9th edition is already on order, 40 copies. From the alcove table came a small sound that the directional pickups classified after review as the respondent counsel briefly inhaling her tea. What remained was ceremony, and the Hall of Standing Names did ceremony the way the glass orchards had once done autumn. The clerks of the wall went up on their long lifts with the leafing tools, and 6 centuries of charters watched Green Hollow. Moon of Caro struck from the modest registry script and rewritten in vindicated leaf. Brighter metal, deeper cut, the letters of a name that had been tried and held, and the human delegation stood to see it. The Reeve with his gray head back and his jaw working, 2 colony witnesses flown in for testimony that had never been needed, and the advocate, who watched her client's name go up the wall with the same service counter calm she had brought to everything, and then quietly checked the time, like a woman with another matter listed in the afternoon. Before the recitation, Kais said, the tribunal has one further item, addressed to the respondent's counsel directly, Madam Hale. This hall standing orders wait floor time by accreditation. You were assigned a 5th share under a schedule that this proceeding has rendered a pause, the judicial equivalent of choosing not to swear, embarrassing. The gradient has amended the orders this morning. Accreditation wait is abolished. Floor time follows the witness list. The amendment is unofficially titled, in the clerk's minute, the catering rule, and the gradient has declined to rename it. The tribunal apologizes to you for the schedule, for the seating registry, and for the laughter which it permitted. Additionally, the assessors are empowered to recognize accreditation by demonstrated competence and are unanimously minded to enter you on this tribunal's roles as qualified in charter law, effective today if you'll have it. The hall waited. The feeds, replaying it later, liked to slow this moment down. The young human standing at her small table between the tea urns, being offered the oldest accreditation in the Verge by 9 assessors in full session, with her colony's name still warm on the wall behind her. That's generous, first assessor, and I'm honored, Hale said. No, thank you, no. Charter law has plenty of advocates. And as of this morning, it has the catering rule, so the next one they laugh at gets a full share of the floor without my help. She said it without performance, as though declining a second biscuit. But the Verge smallware circuit is 9 seasons behind on carriage claims. Because everyone qualified keeps getting poached by halls like this one, somebody has to stay where the wax is. It's where the lying starts, first assessor. You've seen yourselves where it ends. She gathered the strap of the carpet bag onto her shoulder and added, in the tone of a vendor leaving a card, though if the tribunal ever wants a guest lecturer on tag registries, my rates are reasonable, and I'm told the refreshments here are excellent. The tribunal, Kai said gravely, will hold the alcove table, and then it was the last item, and the hall went quiet in a way it had not gone quiet all season, not the leaning quiet of appetite, nor the held breath quiet of collapse, but something the recorders had no classification for, and the feeds would simply caption in the end with the timestamp and no words at all. Tyrrell Osk walked to the center of the floor, where the acoustics flatter, with the accreditation folio of Juniper Hale, advocate, in both hands. He stood where he had stood on the first morning. The gallery benches held many of the same delegations, the Ulmain freight masters with their feeding arms still, the orchard families in their silks, the matriarch upright on her cane, watching, required by no order to attend and attending, and he read it again, all of it this time, from the first line, and the Hall of Standing Names heard, in the corrected register of the permanent record, what had been entered there 2 weeks earlier as a joke. Juniper Hale, accredited advocate, Terran Guild of Domestic and Hospitality Arbitration. Item 1, carriage and care of perishable goods, refrigerated and ambient with distinction. Item 2, Festal and Banquet Protocol Law, 3 seasons certified on the Verge Circuit. Item 3, claims arbitration, food and beverage, 81 matters resolved without appeal. Item 4, fragrance and cosmetic compliance, adulteration and provenance. Item 5, festal wax, bonding wax, and sealing standards. He did not pause for the gallery, and the gallery offered nothing to pause for. Item 6, textile, sumptuary, and document standard claims. Item 7, catering and victualling contracts, station and orbital. Item 8, ornamental horticulture trade standards, 4 seasons, trade fair arbitration panel. Item 9, cold chain and ambient carriage disputes, surveyor rated. Of item 10, junior mediator, Green Hollow Settlers Association, 7 years unpaid. Item 11, baking, festival class, second prize, Green Hollow Agricultural Fair. He closed the folio. The recitation is corrected, first assessor. For the record, there was nothing in it to laugh at the first time. The deficiency recorded that morning was mine. He bowed to the alcove table, the full formal bow, junior to senior, and the Hall of Standing Names. 2,000 beings from 40 worlds in the oldest room in the Verge rose to its feet without anyone calling it to, and gave the smallwares arbiter from Earth the standing it had been declining to imagine for 2 weeks. In silence, all the way up the gradient, 9 assessors inclining together while the wall of names burned behind them. Juniper Hale stood at her catering table with her carpet bag on her shoulder and bore it, visibly unsure where to put her hands, and the recorders preserve her entire response to the longest silent ovation in the tribunal's modern history, delivered as the delegations finally settled. "Second prize," she said, to the hall at large, by way of correction. The fair's bread division is extremely competitive. The season ended the way seasons end on the concourse. The delegations lifted away one by one, the rented chambers were swept, and the Hall of Standing Names went back to its ordinary diet of boundary petitions and tariff appeals, none of which drew a tenth of a gallery. The feeds wrung the last juice from the story inside a month. The caption was the thing Calcera watched with the most professional interest, because captions are verdicts the public writes for itself. And she wanted to know who would end up owning this one. The Garnish Advocate had been coined as a sneer. By the petition's collapse, it was a headline. By the time the criminal assize convened on Ophale, it had completed the oldest migration in language, the insult claimed as a title, and small Wares arbiters across the verge had reportedly begun accepting the term as a professional honorific, the way old soldiers wear the nicknames their enemies invented. The laughter, Calcera noted in the memorandum she was writing for her chamber's archive, had not died. Laughter never dies. It had merely changed owners, which is the only justice laughter ever submits to. The assize did its work through the cold months. Factor Dre Olven defended himself with the same beautiful reasonableness that had nearly survived the Hall of Standing Names. And it lasted exactly as long as it took the prosecutors to introduce 41 ceramic tags and a draft prayer for relief with a creation seal, at which point reasonableness was revealed one final time to be a finish rather than a material, lacquer, not wood. He was stripped of his factor's seal and sentenced to restitution labor in the receivership of the estate he had administered, which the feeds called poetic, and Calcera, who had watched the 400 families' pension motion succeed by hours, called merely accurate. Keeper Isili Marn received judgment discharged on candor, the assize's lightest instrument, and emigrated within the month. The freight manifests, which Calcera had taken to reading the way other beings read poetry, recorded her outbound luggage as tools, horticultural, 1 crate, cuttings, certified rootstock, 6 under phytosanitary seal. The glass orchards were dead. 6 cuttings of the old lineage had survived in the keeper's quarantine bay, propagated quietly across 3 seasons of managed decline by a woman who had been forced to write fiction for her house and had answered by keeping life itself as her copies. They went to Green Hollow, Moon of Caro, where the soil was honest and the water was now legally permanent. The colony, the agricultural feeds reported, had voted to plant them along the landing road, where every arriving ship would taxi past 900 years of Ophale on its way to a human harvest. The matriarch did not live to see the assize conclude. The notices were restrained. The great houses closed around their wounded the way they always had. But the executor's office released, as the will directed, a single bequest outside the family, the cane, cut from the first tree to die, to Madame J. Hale, Advocate, with a card in the old woman's own hand that the feeds would have paid fortunes for and never saw. Calcera saw it because the executor required a witness of standing for the transfer, and 11 generations had to be useful for something. The card read, "For the only person in that hall who told me the true number. It is a good stick. Ask it how it was seasoned. I am told you can tell." The human had held the cane a long moment, run her thumb once along the grain with that appraiser's touch she brought to wax and silk and paper, and said, finally, to no one in particular, "Kiln-dried, too fast. It'll check along the handle in a few years." A pause. She knew that. It's the whole message. Calcera had gone home and sat with that for an evening, and concluded that the old woman's last communication on this side of the dark was a confession in joinery, something beautiful, dried too fast, cracking from the inside, and that the human had read it on receipt, at a glance, the way she read everything. Small wares. The discipline of what things actually do. Her own chambers changed the way old institutions change. Outwardly nothing, inwardly everything. The 40 copies of Carriage and Care of Perishable Goods, 9th edition, arrived in their oilcloth bindings, and Calcera shelved one in the place her grandmother's commentaries had held for 60 years, and defied her ancestors to say anything. The new curriculum, the tribunal's direction, executed in full, sent every junior of her chambers to ride 1 full season of the small wares circuit before they were permitted to touch a heritage brief, and the first cohort came back, changed in a way she recognized. They had stopped reading attestations as facts and started reading them as claims, which is the entire difference between a clerk and an advocate, and which the great chambers had somehow stopped teaching when the paper got beautiful enough. Tyrrell Osk went first, voluntarily, to a tariff and spoilage docket on a cold route transfer station, and sent back memoranda so dense with cargo chemistry that Calcera began reading, them allowed at Chambers meals as both instruction and entertainment. He returned with a surveyor's rating in ambient carriage, an Almani drinking song, and a folio of his own which he kept deliberately thin. Items accrete, he said when she remarked on it. Laughter should have to do its research. He would hold a speaking stone before the Hall of Standing Names within 5 years, she estimated, and would be the first of her line's juniors in 3 centuries to deserve it for the right reasons. As for Calcera Vin herself, 11th of her line, reprimanded with a finding of eventual candor, she resumed her practice and discovered that the reprimand had made her, by the perverse economics of reputation, more retained than ever. Houses with honest cases wanted the advocate who had stood up in the season's wreckage and repriced her own integrity on the record. Houses with dishonest ones now knew better than to bring her beautiful paper. She took the honest cases. She found, to her mild ongoing surprise, that there were more of them than her inheritance had taught her to expect, once one's clients understood the terms. And once a season, this had become, without either of them ever proposing it, simply a thing that occurred. A courier parcel arrived at her chambers from whatever station the Verge smallware circuit had reached, containing 1 tin of green hollow shortbread, festival class, and 6 lines in a plain strong hand. A note on some matter of mutual professional interest. A wax adulteration ring broken on the Briss orbital markets. A sumptuary fraud that had tried, briefly and fatally, to fake a vindicated leaf charter inscription. A carriage claim whose resolution turned on the oxidation rate of sallow nectar, enclosed without comment because none was required. Calcera answered each one over her own seal, and her replies grew season by season, less like correspondence between former adversaries and more like the working papers of 2 practitioners of the same discipline who had met, inconveniently, on opposite sides of its founding case. The last parcel of the cycle arrived on the anniversary of the verdict, and it contained, besides the tin, an item that made Calcera Vin sit down. A printed syllabus. The Verge Circuit School of Smallware's Advocacy, the cover read. First intake. Instruction in wax, paper, lacquer, fabric, nectar, perfume, tags, and the care of perishable truth. Beneath it, the founding faculty. J. Hale, Principal, I. Marn, Grounds and Soils. And beneath that, in the plain strong hand, the 6 lines. Counsel, the school is real. The funding is biscuits. And the first class is 11 students from 9 species, 4 of whom were laughed at by somebody important enough to make them want this. We have wax, soil, and a tag kiln. What we lack is someone to teach them how a great hall thinks, how the beautiful paper gets believed, from the believing side. 1 seminar a season. Your rates are reasonable. I checked. The refreshments are excellent. IJH. Calcera read it twice. Then she rang for her clerk, had the season's calendar brought, and looked for a long moment at the engagements of a senior advocate of the Hall of Standing Names, the heritage retainers, the council dinners, the 11 generations of beautiful load-bearing obligations. Clear the 4th week, she said. Recurring every season indefinitely, enter it as teaching. Yes, senior. Under which client? Calcera Vin considered the question with the care it deserved. Outside her chamber's window, the concourse ring turned through its manufactured evening, and somewhere down its lamplit length, in the Hall of Standing Names, a wall of charters burned quietly in the dark. 6 centuries of worlds given and worlds taken away, and 1 small recent name in bright vindicated leaf that an entire gallery had once laughed at in 3 flavors. She thought about wax that crazes in the cold, and nectar that browns in an hour, and lacquer that blooms gray in the rain, and all the small true behaviors of small true things, which cannot be retained, cannot be flattered, cannot be attested into compliance, and will testify with perfect candor against anyone, forever the moment somebody in the room knows how to ask. The galaxy had organized its prestige around the big number for 6 centuries. The big number, it turned out, was wholesale theater. The little ones ran the universe. Under instruction, she said. File it under instruction. Her clerk entered it, and the entry stands in the chamber's books to this day. Renewed each season in the 11th generation's own hand, between a charter renewal and a house funeral. 4th week, the circuit school. Principal Hale. Subject, how believing works. Fee, waived. Refreshments, provided. It was, the clerk once observed, the only engagement in the book the senior had never once rescheduled. No, Calcera agreed. Some appointments one keeps. The lady arbitrates perishables. She permitted herself 1 slow blink of her second eyelids, which, in a hiesserie of her caste, looked like rest, and had finally earned the resemblance. Nothing she's owed will be allowed to spoil.